Don't ask me to duplicate it.
That's all good.
All right, I would say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsor, Mrs. Salma Wolf, for dedicating all of Shumer's Roshos this month with immense gratitude for the refuah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with the merit of our refuah shalema for all of those in need, in the schus of our brave soldiers, and in the schus of the return of our hostages. Our week of learning sponsors, Ken and Dina Lieblich, in the merit and the safe return of their son, Aaron Daniel Ben Fruma Dina, and his entire pluga from Gaza. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, they will accomplish their objectives, be successful in their missions, and return to their families b'shalom and b'karov. And we dedicate all the Meseches Bava Kamma, the Ilui Nishmas, Master Sergeant Elio Michal Charush. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, his neshama will have an aliyah and his family in a Kamma. With that, let us. Okay, I didn't see. I'm on airplane mode already. I'll send it out afterwards. All right. I will say tremendous yashkach to everyone. Let's begin. So we'll say. So we are. Today's daf is Tzadik Aleph. Today's daf is Tzadik Aleph. We are picking up Emeretz Hashem on Tzadik Amud Beis 90b, and we are picking up Emeretz Hashem at V'i Bais Ema. So we'll say. So this is 2, 4, 6 lines up from where the wide lines begin. So just to reorient ourselves a little bit, we saw an interesting case. Remember, our Mishnah dealt with the topic of Boshas, with the payment for humiliation. So we are picking up, there was an interesting case in the Gemara that an individual went ahead and an individual came along and taka. So taka could either mean, again, he hit his friend in the ear, he made a loud noise in the ear. Point is, he went ahead and he injured him. So what happened? The situation came before Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda said, me and Rabbi Yossi Aglili, right? There's me and Rabbi Yossi Aglili, pay the guy a mana tsuri. So first of all, what it established was that the mana that you have to pay is a mana tsuri, which is a higher level mana, and not a mana medina. That's number one. But then it segued into is what exactly happened over here. In other words, what it sounds like is Rabbi Yehuda saw what occurred, and then halacha l'maisa, he quote-unquote adjudicated the case. Now, in order for that to work, we'd have to utilize a mechanism called Eid Na'aseh Dayan, that a witness has the ability to transform into a judge. So now the Gemara kind of jumped into that particular discussion. So the Gemara is trying to reconcile how this case is working. So we're picking up B'Baisim. The other possibility is, this is what Rabbi Yehuda was saying to the individual. Anna, the Sirlik Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Damar Manatsuri, Vahas Sahadi de Mishadi Bey, Zeal Havli Manatsuri. Supposed to the other possibility was like this. That what Rabbi Yehuda was saying was as follows. Rabbi Yehuda was saying to the guy like this: I hold like Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So statement number one is we hold like Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says the mana that is to be paid is a manatsuri. That's number one. And Rabbi Yehuda said, by the way, these are the two people who witnessed this event. Go and pay your victim based on the testimony of these two witnesses. So Rabbi Yehuda, interestingly enough, Rabbi Yehuda is not acting as an aid. He's not acting as a witness, nor is he acting as a dayan. Or maybe he's acting a little bit as a dayan, but not as an aid. Okay, v'sav Rabbi Akiva de'ein aid na'ad nas dayan. So most of the Gemara now says, does Rabbi Akiva hold that a witness cannot become a judge? So I will say, it's actually a really interesting concept that you could have people who witness an event and then can they transform after delivering their testimony, so to speak, or maybe even in the midst of delivering their testimony, can they transform into a judge? So the Gemara says, does Rabbi Akiva hold that an aide can't become a judge? But we learned V'hika ish esreyehu ba'even o ba'egrov. So also the pasuk says as follows: if people are fighting and one man hits his friend, or hits his fellow, be'even with a stone or be'egrov, with a fist. With a fist. So the Gemara says, Shimon Hatemani Omer. So Shimon Hatimni says as follows. He says, Ma egrov miyuchad shemasra le'eda ule'edim, af kol shemasra le'eda ule'edim. So Rabbi say, here's what's interesting. Why does the Torah have to go out of its way and say, if a person will strike his friend or strike his fellow with a stone or with a fist? What's the pshat? So it's actually really interesting. So what's unique about the fist? That the witnesses could assess it. Right, the witnesses could assess. In other words, obviously the fist is part of the assailant, right? So the witnesses have the ability to go ahead and examine the fist to be able to see is this fist capable of inflicting the level of harm that occurred. We'll say, interesting part in damages is like this, that sometimes a person can become damaged, but we have to see, one is only chayav for damages if the blow that they delivered or if the damage that they inflicted is really capable of creating the particular result that's in front of us. We'll see exactly a little bit more what this means in just a moment. So the idea over here is, ma egrov, just like a fist is unique, shemasra le'eda uli edim. Literally again, it's given over to the Beis Din, that's the Eda, ula edim, and to the witnesses, af kol shemasra le'eda ula edim. So to anything that is given over to the witnesses and to the Beis Din. I both say, now what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Shemasra le'eda ula edim, so that they could bring the object with which the damage was perpetrated, and they could bring it before Beis Din la'omdo to assess imroi egrof ze lasos chavalazu ve'im ein roi lo yishalim shemachmas choshaso shel ze v'rakaso nechbal. So Rabbi say this is really fascinating. Up until you see this Gemara, you would assume that how does damages work? Reuven comes along and hits Shimon in the face, right? And as a result, Shimon suffers X amount of damages. Okay, so therefore, Allah Chalamaysa orders Reuven chayiv for X amount of damages. What the Gemara seems to be introducing us to us is the following. What Beis Din also looks like is, how did Reuven hit Shimon? Where did Reuven hit Shimon? And what is the capacity for this type of blow, right? How much damages should this type of blow inflict? Now, obviously, in order to do that, what do you have to look at? You have to look at the instrument used to damage. And we look at, is this type of instrument capable of inflicting this level of damage? So the Gemara now says, so that applies even with a fist. It's interesting, right? So we look at the fist, we look at Reuven's fist, and we look at Reuven's ability, right? We look at the power of the blow that Reuven could inflict, and what level of damage is it capable of inflicting? So the Gemara, where is the Gemara learning this out from? So the Gemara is learning this out from the phrase, ultimately again, Vehika ishas re'ehu ba'even or be'egrof. Why just say be'even or just say nothing? Why do you have to say egrof? Why fist? Because just like the fist is readily available for the witnesses to inspect, and even better than the word inspecting is to assess what level of damage is a guy like Reuven really capable of inflicting with his fist, so too for the Beis Din to arrive at a conclusion or arrive at a verdict, they have to assess the instrument that was used to visit the damage upon the victim. Incredible. Prat l'shiyata samitacha sideidim. So both sides comes to exclude a case, ultimately again, of where what? Of where halacha l'maisa, the object that was used to inflict the damage is no longer here, and therefore again the witnesses don't have the ability to examine it. Rabbi Akiva says, 1 second. But was the damage done in front of Beis Din? That Beis Din has the ability to go ahead and really inspect, right? Ultimately, how Reuven damaged Shimon, right? Amaiko, what he hit him with, or I should say, what he hit him on. Imal Shoko, did he hit him on the thigh, or Al Tzipor Nafsho, or did he hit him opposite the heart? Va'od. So Hari Shedacha Veschaver Mirosh Hagag. I'll give you another example. Let's say Reuven pushed Shimon off a roof, or Mirosh Habira, from on top of a tower, Umes, and now Shimon fell and he died. So Beis Din Holchin Eitzel Bira, O Bira Holachas Eitzel Beis Din, right? Does Beis Din go to the tower? Does the tower come to Beis Din? Va'odim Nafla. Let's say again, Reuven threw Shimon off a roof of a building, and the building subsequently fell down. Chozer Ubona. Does the assailant have to rebuild the building so that Beis Din is able to see, does this type of fall, or did this type of fall have the ability really to go ahead and kill Shimon? Ella ma egrof miyuchad shu masra le'edim af kol shu masra le'edim. So what Rabbi Akiva is coming to add is Beis Din doesn't really do the job of inspecting the instrument of damage. Rather, I will say, who really has to testify to that? The witnesses. Because it's quite possible that by the time this gets to Beis Din, either the item, the object that damage was perpetrated with is no longer there, right? Or Lamaisa, it's just too difficult to reconstruct it in front of Beis Din. In other words, we'll say, it's very interesting. What Rabbi Akiva is adding is, part of giving testimony in damages or in a capital case is not just testifying, we saw Reuven hit Shimon. It's testifying what? We saw Reuven hit Shimon with X, and X is capable of performing this level of damage. That's what the testimony is. Prat even mitachas yado shalmaka pater. So Rabbi will say, when would you come to? So what does the pasuk come to teach me? The pasuk is coming to teach you that witnesses have to be able to see the instrument that damage was done with and assess whether or not that instrument really has the ability and capability of performing this level of damage. So therefore, the pasuk is coming to say the following: if for some reason the object which was used for the damage was lost, then in that kind of case, Eidim can't give proper testimony about the case. Katani mihas. So I will say, what's the takeaway from all of this? Katani mihas. I'm Rabbi Akiva. V'chi Beis Din hiko. V'chi bifnei Beis Din hiko. Sheyodin Kamma hiko. So I will say, so Rabbi Akiva say, Rabbi Akiva said in general, the Beis Din doesn't have the ability to assess whether or not the object used for damages has the ability to inflict the level of damages that occurred. So what do you see from here? So the Gemara says, "Hai kal b'fneihem eid na'ased dayan." So I will say what you do see is that had Reuven injured Shimon in front of Beis Din, then what? Beis Din could have served in his dual capacity. They could have served as witnesses to the event and then transformed into the Beis Din that would actually adjudicate the case. So you see that according to Rabbi Akiva, eid na'ased dayan. To which the Gemara says, no. L'dvar Rabbi Shimon atimni. No. Rabbi Akiva was actually responding to Shimon HaTimni. Shimon HaTimni was the one who ultimately holds Eid Na'aseh Dayan, but Rabbi Akiva himself does not hold that way. Okay? Tan Rabbanan. So I'll say so again. So just understand this concept of Eid Na'aseh Dayan is an ongoing machlokes. In other words, Rabbi will say, so this concept of can you witness an event, and then after witnessing the event, so now again you are locked in as the testimonial unit, can that same group transform into ultimately going ahead and being a dayan, going ahead and judging the case? Let's see now if you think about it. So Rabbi Akiva himself happens to hold ein eid na'aseh dayan. Let's see if you think about this. By the way, there's also a very profound interpersonal lesson in this about eid na'aseh dayan, ein eid na'aseh dayan. What is it saying? Let's say when you experience an event, do you have the ability to look at it objectively? And really what Rabbi Akiva is saying is the answer to that is no. Right? Once you experience something, then ultimately, again, you're experiencing through your lens. I will say almost everyone lacks objectivity. Right? Especially when you're seeing something firsthand, you're experiencing something firsthand, you absorb that information through your personalistic, biased lens. So Rabbi Akiva will say, oh, you can't become a dayan. You could be an aid. In other words, you could retell what you saw, recognizing that even when aidim tell over what they saw, there is an inherent bias. There's inherent bias. But Lamaisa, again, you can't become a dayan because a dayan, to a certain degree, needs to be able to hear things and experience things with a sense of objectivity. So I would say it's important. Sometimes we hear people say things, we see people do things, and we think we've kind of got it all summed up, right? So I got it sized up. I could see this in an objective way. No, you don't. No, you don't. When you hear something and you see something, you're processing that through your own personalistic lens, and just understand, be careful who you judge and what you judge, because ein eid na'aseh dayan. Don't rush to judgment, because when you see things and when you hear things, you're processing that through your personal lens, and you may or may not be seeing objective truth. Incredible yesod in relationships. So the Gemara goes weiter. Turn on. Shor tam shehemis vehizik. This is actually an interesting case. So let's say if you have watch this, you have a short time that ultimately again killed someone and damaged someone. So the short, we'll say two independent acts, obviously to two different people, right? So you have a short time. So again, the short never did anything. injures Ruvain and it kills Shimon. So what's the halacha? So we'll say, so now the shar is brought to Beis Din. Danin also dine nefashas, vein danin also dine mamanas. So I will say, so what we do is we essentially adjudicate the death case and we set aside the financial penalty case. Now what's the logic of that? Rashi says, "In danin also dine mamanas, the tam in mishalim ela migufo paruniskan." This is actually very interesting. So obviously, this is not a kimle b'derabimine, right? Because that concept only applies to people, not animals. So what's happening over here? Here's the problem. We'll say, what's the din of a shar that kills someone? What's the din of a shar that kills someone? It's executed, right? And there's no tam, there's no muad. It's executed. Now watch this. So you have two halachas over here. A muad, a tam animal, if it damages, what does it pay? What does it pay? Chatzi nezek. Chatzi nezek is assessed how? Migufo. Remember, it's half damages that's capped at the value of the animal itself, of the damaging animal itself. So we'll say, here's the problem. Once an animal kills someone, it's going to be subject to death. Once it's subject to death, it has no value. If it has no value, then what? Then there's no chatzi nezek. That's it. Because remember again, chatzi nezek, half damages paid from the value of the animal itself. If the animal kills someone going to be put to death, the animal has no value. So therefore, in this case over here, shar, right, kills Ruvain, injures Shimon. The Gemara essentially says, halacha l'maisa, we execute it, and there's no real claim for damages because again, the source of those damages, i.e. the value of the animal, is now worth nothing. Muad shehimis vehizik. What happens, we'll say, if you have a muad animal, right? So now again, you have a muad animal, that same thing. So now the shar kills Ruvain, injures Shimon. The difference just is in this case, the animal is a muad. Now both say, and remember again, when a muad does damages, how does a muad do damages? Oh, sorry, what does a muad pay for damages? Nezek shalim. How does it pay nezek shalim? Min aliyah. Min aliyah means what? From the owner's best property. So in this case over here, danin also dine mamanis, the chazan danin also dine nefashas. So we'll say in this case, Beis Din will adjudicate both cases, both the dine mamanis as well as the dine nefashas. Why? So we'll execute the animal, but that's okay. Why? Because damages is not paid from the guf of the animal. What is damages paid from? The owner's property. The owner's property. So in this case, very interesting. We'll adjudicate both cases. Now watch this. Kadmo vidanuhu dine nefashas. So again, so therefore, the way this should work is how? Beis Din will first adjudicate the dine mamanis, and then they'll go back and adjudicate the dine nefashas. Let's say they switched it around and they adjudicated dine nefashas first, and then what's the halacha? Kadmu v'danu dine nefashas, in chosron v'danin also dine mamanis. So we'll say if they adjudicated the dine nefashas case first, then we won't go ahead and adjudicate the dine mamanis. I understand, who cares? What does it matter? In other words, what does it matter which case you adjudicated first? Here I will say again, in the muad case, damages come in ha'aliyah from the owner of the shars. We haven't used this word in a while. Choicest, right? Choicest properties. So lemaisa again, what does it matter what the order of adjudication is? Even if they went ahead and they adjudicated the capital case first, let them go ahead and adjudicate the financial penalty case afterwards. Amrava, so ashkechasin l'rabbanan debei Rav diyanse v'ka'amri. So we'll say Rava said, the truth is, we were talking about this question, and I found ultimately the Rabbanan sitting in the yeshiva of Rav, and they said the following: Hambani, we'll say, whose opinion is this? Rabbi Shimon Timnihi da'amar ma'egrof miyuchad shemasra li'eda u'li'edim. So we'll say, whose opinion does this reflect? Shimon Timni. What does Shimon Timni say? Shimon Timni holds that halacha l'maisa. What's unique about the egrof that's mentioned in the pasuk and the fist, in that the egrof, the fist, i.e., the vehicle of damage or the tool or the item which was used to damage, is readily available to be assessed both by the witnesses and by Beis Din. About top of Tzadik Aleph 91a, Alma ba'inan umdina de beidina. So everybody say, what do you see from here? You see from here that before Beis Din assesses, before Beis Din rules on damages, what does Beis Din have to do? Beis Din has to see the object with which the damage was performed, and ultimately again assess that this object is capable of visiting upon the victim this level of damage. So the Gemara says, "Vaha kevan de gamardina liktala lo mashin lo umdina de beidina v'lo ma'anina ledine." So we'll say this is incredible. So what's happening over here? We'll say so. What's happening over here is once a shar, right? If a shar kills someone and Beis Din establishes that this shar is going to be put to death, we don't delay. We don't delay. We execute that shar right then and there. So therefore, I will say, because you're executing the shar right then and there, therefore what? Therefore, it's not available to Beis Din for assessment. And because it's not available for assessment, therefore, Beis Din can't adjudicate the monetary claim case. So it's actually a practical consideration. So therefore I will say, watch this. Let's go through this case again, because it's actually quite fascinating. So you have a shar killed Ruvain, injured Shimon. Rabbi will say, so now, if it's a tam, so we adjudicate the capital case, can't adjudicate the monetary case. Why? Because there's nothing to adjudicate the monetary case from, since tam pays chatzi nezek from capped at the body of the animal. The body of the animal is worthless and it's going to be put to death. Fine. In case of a muad, no problem. Could adjudicate both cases. Why? Why? Because the monetary case is paid bin aliyah from the best property of the owner of the shar, and great, you could assess that whether or not there's a shar or not. There's nothing to do with the shar. So therefore, we'll adjudicate both cases, the monetary claim and the capital claim. However, the Raisa says, if you first adjudicated the capital claim, then ultimately, again, we don't assess the monetary claim. Why not? Because the Gemara is now explaining, once the capital claim was assessed, what do we do with the animal? What do we do with the animal? We go ahead and we execute it. However, why does that pose a problem for the monetary claim? Because it's reflecting the view of Shimon HaTimni. Shimon HaTimni says that whenever you adjudicate a monetary claim, Beis Din has to assess the object used for damage, right, to visit the damage. In this case, since the animal is going to be executed right away, Beis Din can't assess the object used for damage, i.e. shar, and therefore they can't assess the monetary claim. It's a technical issue. And I said to them, Rabbi Akiva, the truth is this can even reflect the view of Rabbi Akiva. What's the case over here? Kigon Shebarach. So we'll say the case over here, we can set up according to Rabbi Akiva as well. What happened? The owner of the shar ran away. Ran away. Now we'll say you can't bring a monetary claim against someone unless, of course, what? Unless, of course, the owner of the shar is there. Now, it's actually interesting that what it sounds like according to Rabbi Akiva is you can't try a person in absentia, which is very interesting, right? Because again, there are definitely cases like this that come up where the person is not there. So Rashi brings down over here, this is a din of ein chavin la'adam shelo b'fanav. You cannot do something detrimental to someone, ultimately not in their presence. So therefore, it could be even a case of Rabbi Akiva where the owner ran away. If the owner ran away, there's no way to adjudicate the case. Ibarach kilo danu dine nefashas. I'm sorry. Ibarach kilo danu dine nefashas. Hechi dainina lei. Dine Mamanis below Bailim. So we'll say, now, 1 second. If we're talking about a case of where he ran away, so the truth is that would prevent you from adjudicating either of these cases. To which the Gemara says, no. The Kabil Sahadi Ubarach. The case could be, Rabosai, where testimony was accepted and then the guy ran away. So the owner ran away. Now, here's the difference. If testimony was accepted, that would allow you, let's say, for example, to go ahead and accept the capital case. Right? So if testimony was accepted, they could rule on that. But now, since the owner is gone, they would not be able to open up the monetary case. Okay? To which the Gemara says, Sof, mehecha mishtalim. So we'll say, here's the problem. If you go ahead and you adjudicate the case, let's say you accepted testimony, and then the owner ran away, again, how would you extract payment? To which the Gemara says, miridia, not a problem. So Rabbi say, even if the owner runs away, but if the owner ran away after testimony was accepted, so let's say Beis Din could rule on this case, if the owner is not there, how are you extracting payment? To which the Gemara says, very simple, that halacha l'maisa from using the animal to plow a field. See, here's what's interesting. If we're talking about a case that halacha l'maisa, let's say you accepted testimony regarding the goring, the damage, and now what happens? Owner runs away before verdict. Verdict comes out that the owner of the shar is chayiv to pay the victim. What's the problem? The owner is not here. So how do you extract payment? It's very simple. You have a shar. And what could you do with the shar? You could lease it out for plowing purposes, and the proceeds from that lease could be used ultimately to pay the victim for his damages. To which the Gemara says, Ihachi tam nidaine dine mamanis beresha v'nishtali miridia. If that's the case, suppose I do the same thing in the time case. In the time case, adjudicate the damages case, go ahead and extract damages from lease payment for plowing, and then after the shor, so to speak, has worked off its debt, then go ahead and adjudicate the capital case. Amar Marbi Rav Kana is also meres redia aliyah demarahu. So we'll say, see something very interesting. What do you see from here? That halacha l'maisa, the leasing out of the animal for plowing, is considered to be a payment min ha'aliyah, from the best property of the owner. And remember again, that only works for muad, doesn't work for tam, because tam ultimately is not entitled to aliyah. Tam is only entitled ultimately to chatzi nezek, capped at the value of the animal. All right, very interesting. So I will say, what comes out over here? What comes out over here is we are still left with our machlokes, ultimately again of Eid Nasadayan or Ein Eid Nasadayan. Machlokes Rabbi Shimon HaTimni versus Rabbi Akiva. Ultimately, again, we also end off with this fascinating discussion about this distinction in the Brisa of halacha l'maisa. If you have a shor tam that went ahead and injured someone and killed someone, so the halacha is in that case over here, we put the animal to death and there is no claim anymore for financial damages, since halacha l'maisa, tam is collectible from the animal itself and the animal is valueless, versus a case ultimately again of muad, where halacha l'maisa, we can ultimately rule on both cases, both the nezek case because it's collectible min ha'aliyah, and ultimately again the capital case as well. Incredible. Ibailahu asks the Gemara, yesh omer l'nezikin or ein omer l'nezikin. So what's another shiloh over here? So I will say, we've assessed over here something interesting, that in capital cases, part of the adjudication process is looking at the object that was used to kill the individual and making sure that that object actually has the ability to develop a death blow, whether it's a rooftop that the guy fell off on, or an object, or a fist. Here's the shaila. When it comes to damages, does Beis Din perform this same type of assessment? In other words, Reuven goes ahead and hits Shimon with a stick, right? Shimon suffers a broken arm. So does Beis Din look at the stick and try to figure out, is such a stick capable of breaking an arm or not? So do we do that by nezikin? Oh, in omen nezikin. So mi amina lekitalu dam dina bahachi nafkan shama bahachi lo nafkan shama aval nezikin koldu. So we'll say, maybe we'll say like this: the only time we go ahead and we really perform an assessment is really when it comes to damages, right? Because by damages we look at, is this object capable of delivering this level of damage or not? But maybe I will say, when it comes ultimately again to death, death is pretty, right? Death is not really all that difficult to determine, right? Either the victim died or he didn't die. So maybe the might say again, we don't. I'm sorry, I said that just the opposite. Just the opposite. When it comes to death, I will say, so death is a little bit more black and white. So that's when we go ahead and that's when we assess. But by nezikin, by damages, maybe we say halacha l'maisa koldu. No, we accept the fact that damages could occur even in any way, and therefore there's no assessment of the object used to visit the damage upon the victim. O dilma loshna, or perhaps no, the same way that we do an assessment ultimately in capital case, we do an assessment of damages as well. So Tashma, let's analyze. So ma bar sheyesh pokadei lahamis asar tfachim. So first wide line. So bar. So I will say, ultimately again, we assume that a bar of 10 tfachim or more has the ability to cause death. Right? A bar less than 10 tfachim doesn't have the ability to cause death. I will say, if the bar was less than 10 tfachim deep, second wide line, 91a, if the bar was less than 10 tfachim, shar ar chamar, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, umeis, and it dies, pater. Ultimately, and it's pater. So it's very interesting, right? So you have a shar or a chamar that falls into a pit of less than 10 tfachim. The animal dies. What's the halacha? Ultimately, again, the owner of the pit is pater. The owner of the pit is pater. So huzik bo chayiv. Now, if the animal was damaged, ultimately, again, the owner of the bar is going to be chayiv. It's going to be chayiv. So the Gemara says, "My lav mimata lemata kachashiv." So we'll say, are we not looking at this measurement of the bar at 10 tefachim and less? And therefore, what are we saying? The ka'amar mitafach va'adasara misalaka nezikinikin. And essentially, what we're saying is like this: a bar of 10 tefachim ultimately has the ability to kill something, but less than 10 tefachim. What does it mean less? From 1 tefach up until 9.9 tefachim has the ability to damage. So we'll say, so what do you see from here? Alma linizakin koldu. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that when it comes to damages, we assume that what? Anything could cause damage. Even a bar of a tefach could cause damages. Shmamina, what do you see from here? That ultimately, again, we do not need to perform an assessment ultimately for damages. To which the Gemara says, no, lo, mimala lemata kachashiv. No. What we're doing is we are going ahead and assessing the amount ultimately, again, mimala lemata, from a higher amount, from a higher depth to a small depth. What does this mean? This is what it means to say, asara misaika. But say a bar of 10 tefachim is capable ultimately of going ahead and causing the animal to die. Watch this. Pachos mi'asara purta. If it's a little less than 10, nizakin isa misa leka. Is capable of damaging, but not capable of killing. So I'll say, but what does that mean? But if it's much less than 10, then what? It's not even capable of damaging. Not even capable of damaging. What do you see from here? There is assessment even for damages. So I'll say ultimately again, what the Gemara is suggesting is there is an assessment for damages. So we don't say that a bar of any depth simply has the ability to damage. Here's what we do know, that a bar that is a little bit less than 10 tefachim does have the ability to damage. What happens if it's a bar that's much less than 10 tefachim? Does it have the ability to damage? We'll say, what does that require? That requires an assessment. That requires an assessment. So you see from here that just like in capital cases, we look at the object that was used to cause death and Beis Din examines it and says and tries to figure out, is this object capable of causing death? So too when it comes to damages, halacha l'maisa, we look at is the object that caused the damage capable of causing this level of damages as well. So Tashma, so here we go. He called al einav simo. If Reuven hits Shimon on his eye and blinded him, on his ear and ultimately made him deaf. So if it was an Eved yotzei bohen lecherus, right? An Eved ultimately again goes free with these type of damages. Okay, keneged eino ve'eino raya. So we'll say it's actually an interesting case. Let's say Reuven went ahead and did something, a loud noise or something else opposite Reuven's eye. Right, so he didn't hit Reuven on the eye. He did something startling opposite Reuven's eye. Keneged eino ve'eino raya, or keneged ozno ve'eino shomea, or he makes a very loud sound opposite Reuven's ear. But again, he never did anything to Reuven's ear directly. What's the halacha? Ein eved yosef ben lecheres. So I'll say if it's an eved would not go free based on this type of injury. My time, what's the reason? Lab mishum deba inon umdina. We'll say it's because such damage like this would require assessment. Ushmamina yesh umdina lenezik. So we'll say it's because it requires a damage, and therefore what? And therefore Allah said the way we assess it is that this type of damage should not have caused blindness. This type of damage should not have caused deafness. And you see from here that when it comes to damages, you do an assessment. To which the Gemara says, Lo, not necessarily. Rather, Rabbi say it could be something different. Mishum da'amrinon hu de'ivis nafshei. Rabbi say this is incredible. Maybe not. Maybe Rabbi say it's just because in the world of damages, the only type of damage you're chayiv for is what? When you directly damage another person. But if you do something outside of the person, right, that let's say startles the person and causes a particular result, the damager is not chayiv for that. Why? Because we assume that what's happened over here, Rabbi say, it's the victim who allowed himself to become scared by this external stimuli, and therefore, again, that's why he suffered this result. Kiditsanya, both listen to this, as we learned. Incredible. Kiditsanya, hamav is his chavero. If a person scares his friend, patr medina adam v'chayv medina shamayim. So this is actually interesting halacha. If Reuven goes over to Shimon and he scares him, and as a result of scaring him, so Shimon suffers some type of damage. He goes blind, he goes deaf. What's the halacha? Reuven is patr. Reuven is patur b'dinei adam, right? He's patur in a court of law, but he will be chayiv in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? So the Gemara says, Keitzad. Talk about Aznav Chirsho. Pater, right? So we'll say, if let's say again Reuven goes over to Shimon and he yells in his ear, right? And Shimon becomes deaf. What's the halacha? Reuven's pater. However, we'll say, if halacha l'maisa Reuven takes hold of Shimon, he holds him, grabs him, and he yells in his ear, in that case he's going to be chayiv. So we'll say, ultimately, again, I will say, now what's the logic? The logic of it, I will say, is, in these cases of external stimuli, what do we say? It's Shimon who made himself deaf, so to speak. In other words, Shimon allowed himself to be scared. Right? In other words, since there's something external, ultimately, again, so we'll say it's interesting. It's that we're saying that halacha l'maisa, it's Shimon allowed the stimuli to affect him in such a way that he went deaf or he became blind. So we'll say this is a really interesting halacha. What halacha is recognizing, I will say, is when it comes to external stimuli, so we make a choice about how we allow it to impact us. It's a very profound yesod. Things happen in life, and maybe people are wrong for going ahead and doing those things to us. But at the end of the day, you make the choice about how you process that, right? Do you allow it to impact you or not? That's up to you. Both say, what a tremendous yesod. Sometimes people do negative things to us. And so we assume, right, that's the perpetrator, I'm the victim, and I have no choice but to be impacted by what just occurred to me. That is false. That is false. You have a choice about how to process the events that occur to you in life, right? Especially, again, I will say, especially in these kind of cases where, again, no one's doing something to me physically, there's this external stimuli. How you choose to process that, how you choose to emotionally and intellectually ingest that, that's up to you. Every single day, stuff happens to us. How we choose to allow those things to impact us, that's a choice we make. Incredible. So the Gemara goes back to Tashma. Chamisha devarim omdin oso v'noslan lo miyad. So we'll say there are 5 types of damages. And the halacha l'maisa, again, they are assessed and they're given to me immediately. In other words, damages are paid immediately. So the Gemara said, "Ripoi v'sheves ad she'isrape." Now, we're saying the only 2 forms of damages that are not assessed until later or paid until later are ripoi, doctor bills, and lost wages, right? Because we'll say, obviously, if Reuven injures Shimon, we don't know how much, right? Bezin doesn't know in the immediate aftermath of damages, how much are doctor bills going to cost? We don't know. Or Sheves, lost wages, we don't know. That only becomes known later on. So the Gemara says, listen to this. Amdua v'hayim misnavne v'holech. I will say, so let's say again, halacha l'maisa. They assessed ultimately again these amounts, right? Let's say Ripoi and Sheves. At a certain point they assessed it. And now we'll say what happened. The victim took more doctor bills or ultimately more lost wages. We'll say once Bezin, we'll talk about this more, once Bezin makes the assessment for Ripoi, for Sheves, for anything, even if the patient's turn, the victim's turn took a turn for his health, took a turn for the worse, we do not award him any more damages. Once you're awarded, that's what you get. Conversely, so the Gemara says, Lamemra, Gavra, so the Gemara says, good, Shmamina, what do you see from here? Yesh Omul and Ezekin. Now I will say, what you do see over here is that what? Is that Allah Lamaisa, there is an assessment for damages, to which the Gemara says, Lameimad Gavra, Kamma Liktsar Miha Maka, Kamma Lo Miktsar Lokami Bailan. So we'll say, obviously, and we'll say, it goes without saying, of course there's an assessment. How long should it take this person to go ahead and recover from this injury? Right? We'll say, how long or how short? Of course we assess that. Ki Kami Bailan, we'll say, what's the shaila? Lameimad Cheftza. So we'll say, just to be clear, when we speak about is there an assessment for damages, we'll say, of course there's an assessment. In other words, when you have to assess doctor bills, you have to assess lost wages, you have to assess, of course, it's nezek, tsar, boshes, there's always an assessment for the person. We'll say, what's the shayla? When we ask, is there an assessment for damages? What are we asking? We're asking, is there an assessment of the object used to damage? The same way in a capital case, right? Reuven kills Shimon. What we look at, Rabbi say, is what? The object that was used to visit the death blow, upright from Reuven upon Shimon. Does that object have the capacity to kill? So the shayla over here is when you damage someone, do we assess the tool used for damage? Of course, you're assessing the victim. That goes without saying. You can't go ahead and figure out what damages are without assessing the victim. The shayla is, do you assess the tool? So Tashma, Shimon Atimni Omer Ma Egrof Miyuchad Shemasu Le'edu Li'edim Avkol Shemiyuchad Shem Avkol Shemiyuchad Shemasu Le'edu Li'edim. So what's that Shimon Atimni said? Just like a fist is unique, that it can be assessed by the witnesses in the Beis Din, so too anything that could be assessed by the witnesses in the Beis Din. Shmamina Yesh Ola Nizakin Shmamina. Suppose I see from here, yes, we do an assess. Same with it in a capital case. We do an assessment of the object to see if halacha l'maaseh is capable of killing someone. So too in a case of damages, we do an assessment to make sure the object used for damage is capable of injuring someone. Incredible. Amar, Amdua v'hivri. So we'll say, watch this. Let's say Reuven injured Shimon. Beis made an assessment that Reuven is going to go. It's going to take him 5 days to recover. So they assess doctor bills, they assess lost wages, and now what happens? Baruch Hashem, Shimon has a miraculous recovery. What's the halacha? And therefore he has less lost wages, less doctor bills. What's the halacha? No stin lo Kamma shamdua. Whatever Beis Din paskind that Shimon's going to get, he gets. We pay him. Rabbi says goes according to Rava says, let's say they assess Reuven injured Shimon, they assess Shimon's going to miss a whole day of work, right? But what happens? Baruch Hashem, he has a great recovery. He only misses half a day of work. Right? Ultimately, we pay him the full amount that Beis Din assessed. Why? We'll say we assume Shimon just has good siyata d'shmaya. So we'll say it's very important halacha. Once Beis Din assesses the damages package, that's it. That's it. So whether ultimately, again, Shimon suffers a reversal of health and misses more work, less work, right? He heals faster. It doesn't matter. Whatever the damages package is, that's what it is, and we don't look at Shimon's continued progression. Incredible. Let's go back there. So the Gemara says, Rakak v'giba rok ve'ever. Remember again, we talk about Boshes and Mishnah. Reuven spits on Shimon, right? Reuven spits on Shimon. So ultimately, again, there's Boshes. If it landed on his clothing, right? Amra Papa Loshana Alabo. When do you have to pay Boshes for spitting on someone else? Ultimately, again, only if the spit landed on Shimon himself. Ava big dolo. But if it landed on his clothing, then there's no Boshes. So the Gemara says, "Heavy kibayish bidvarim." I don't understand. We'll say, why should spitting on someone's clothing be any less than embarrassing them with words? And we assume that if you're mevayish someone with words, there's a boshes payment. So the spitting on their clothing shows we a boshes. Rabbi Yossi Baravin is also embarrassed. Was incredible. But let's say if you embarrass someone with words, ultimately again you're not chayav at all. We'll say so profound. So profound. Why? Because we'll say again, words only become humiliating if you let them become humiliating. If you ignore them, right? If you ultimately, we saw before the Summa Chashav Kameis, right? Ultimately, again, if you simply go ahead and ignore the words, then the words can't have a humiliating impact on you. Incredible. Sakolafi Kvodo. So we'll say, remember again, when it comes to Boshes, everything is in accordance ultimately again with the standing of the victim. So Gemara says, Tanakama l'kula kama or l'chumra kama. So I'll say, here's what's interesting. So here's the shaila. Remember again, in the Mishnah, we were seeing before that ultimately again you had all of these amounts, specific amounts mentioned for Boshes. Then the Tanakama comes along and says, Hakol lefi kvodo. Everything is in accordance with his standing. So we'll say, here's the shaila. Is the Tanakama coming to be mekel or be machmir? What is he adding over here? To which the Gemara says, L'kula or l'chumra kamar. L'kula ka'amar di'ika ani delo bay l'mishkal kulihai. So I want to say is l'kula, because maybe again there's an ani who wouldn't collect the aforementioned amounts. Oh dilma l'chumra kamar. Maybe l'chumra di'ika ashir to bay l'meisiv leitvei. Maybe ultimately again there's an usher you'd have to pay more too. So tashma midikam Rabbi Akiva afilu anim shebi yisrael ronos akiluhem b'nei chorin she'adu b'nei chsein sheheim b'nei Avram Yitzchak v'Yakov. So we'll say the fact that right afterwards in the Mishnah you have the statement of Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva says that Allah l'maisa, every year, every Jew is looked at as an usher who lost his wealth. He's a child of Avram Yitzchak Yaakov. Shmamina Tanakama l'kulo kamar shana. See that the Tanakama ultimately is coming to a mekel. The Tanakama is coming to say that even though we have these fixed aforementioned amounts, there are people perhaps again who would not be entitled to this entire amount because ultimately again their boshes is not as significant. Okay. So let's say remember again, then we had the interesting story in the Mishnah. Ultimately again of the man who uncovered the hair of the woman in the shuk. in the shuk. So we'll say, so remember again, the Gemara says, V'chi avinan zman. So remember again, we saw about this before. So in this case over here, what happened? So the case came before Rabbi Akiva. The assailant, right, the perpetrator, asked for time to pay off the damages. So the Gemara says, do we give people time to pay off damages? After all, v'hamar Rabbi Chanina, ein nostin zman lechabalos. Not true. If you injure someone, we'll say, when is payment due? When is payment due? Payment is due right then and there. There's no delay in payment. So what's going on over here? Tushimar says, no. Kilo yavinan zman lechabala de chasira mamona. Aval aboshes telu chasira mamona yavinan. We'll say, when is there no delay in payment? When you injured someone and you caused them a financial loss, that's when Beis Din demands payment immediately. But if you injured someone, or you caused damages, but there's no loss, what's an example of that? Boshas. So we'll say Boshas payment is, I owe money to someone for humiliating them, but they're not out anything. If they're not out anything, then in that case, halacha l'maisa, we can give the assailant time to pay back. So the Gemara goes weiter. Shamra omedes al pesach chatzir. So we'll say, so remember again in this case, what happened? The assailant hatched this whole plan, right, to go ahead and show that this woman doesn't really have Boshas. She uncovered her own hair, right? She took off her tichel in order to go ahead and mop up the spilled oil. Vatayim Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva says to the guy, Salalta b'mayim adirim, you dived into deep water, ve'elisa cheres biyadech, and all you brought up was a pottery shard. In other words, you really went to digging to try to exempt yourself from Boshes. You dove into deep water, but you didn't really come up with anything. After all, Adam Rashay Lechabel Atzmo, because ultimately Rabbi Akiva said, the same way that a person is permitted to go ahead and injure themselves, right? Injure themselves, and yet as someone else injures them, they're going to be chayiv. So we'll say, now watch this. Here's what's interesting. In the Braisa's version of this, Rabbi Akiva is saying a person is permitted to injure themselves, but yet if someone else injures me, they're chayiv. In our Mishnah, the lashon over here was, Hacholva ba'atzmo afapi she'ena rashay. If a person injures himself, even though he's not permitted to do so, right? If he did so, he's pater. So now the Gemara says is, which one is it? Is a person permitted to injure himself or not permitted to injure himself? So which the Gemara says, lo kasha, kan bechavala, kan beboshes. One is talking about ultimately injuring yourself, one is about humiliating yourself. Injuring yourself, you can't do. Humiliating yourself, you can do. But one second, but that's not true. Our Mishnah is talking about Boshes. So we'll say Amud Beis, V'katani hachova ba'atzmo afapi she'ena rashay pater. Yet we'll say ultimately again, our Mishnah makes it sound like that even by Boshes, you're not permitted to go ahead and injure yourself. Hachi Kamma, this is what it means to say. Hachi Kamma, lo mi by Boshes, adam rashay levaishes atzmo. So we'll say, it goes without saying Boshes, if you want to humiliate yourself, you could humiliate yourself. And we'll say, you have the right to subject yourself to humiliation. Rather, when it comes to injury, so we'll say, but even when it comes to injury, where a person is not permitted to injure themselves, others who injure me ultimately again are going to be chayiv. To which the Gemara says, "Ve'ein adam rashay l'chalav yatzman." And we'll say, is that true? So we'll say, Gemara's kind of getting lost in this interesting topic over here, right? So in other words, remember, what Rabbi Akiva was saying to the guy is, listen, the fact that the lady took off her tichel and went ahead and mopped up the oil, that's her prerogative, right? She could embarrass herself. But just because she can embarrass herself, what? Doesn't give you the right to embarrass her. So therefore you have to pay Boshes. Now the Gemara is getting mixed up a little bit in this detail over here about, does a person have the ability to injure themselves? Right? Let's say, can I subject myself to injury? So we'll say, is a person not permitted to injure themselves? Last time we learned, so we'll say, now watch this. This is a shvuah. Let's say I take a shvuah, I take an oath to do something negative to myself. So you might have thought, such an oath like that, it has no impact. It has no impact, right? You might have thought it has no impact. Tamalomar lahara o lahetiv. Pasuk says if you take an oath, whether for something good or for something bad, you have an obligation to honor it. Ma tav rishus afara rishus. Avi nishba lahara ba'asma v'lo hara. But so what do you see from here? That Allah says, if you take a shvuah to do something bad to yourself and you don't do it, so we'll say what it sounds like over here is, I swear I'm going to break my arm today. Okay, and you don't do it. Sounds like what's halacha bosai? You are in violation of your shvuah. Now, the fact that you're in violation of your shvuah would indicate that what? You have the right to subject yourself to harm. Amar Shmuel, no. Be'eshev b'tainis. What are we talking about over here? Bosai, what's the case of self-harm? The case of self-harm is I take a shvuah, I'm going to fast today. Okay, so that's the case. Suppose I take a shvuah that I'm going to fast today. If you don't fast, then what? You are in violation of your shvuah. So we'll say, because there's a parallel case, ultimately, if you take a shvuah to do something negative to other people, what would be that case? Where you swore that you're going to get other people to fast, and you didn't do so. Ultimately, again, you're chayiv for violation of your shvuah. The Gemara says, how can you get other people to fast? Very simple. In Timahadik Luhu Banjruna. What's the easy way to get people to fast? How do you do that? Lock them in a room. Lock them in a room, right? That works. So I'll say Vatanya. So I'll say, so interestingly enough, so the Gemara seems to say, I will say, it's actually an interesting case if you think about it. Does a person have the right to subject themselves to harm? So the Gemara tried to bring a right from the Shvuah case. The Shvuah case may not be physical harm. That may be a case ultimately of Tainus. Vatanya we learned, Ezra Ras Acherim. So we'll say, what's the case ultimately again of subjecting other people to harm? So Akya Ploni Va'aftzas Mocho. So we'll say the case over there would be a shvuah of, I swear I'm going to go ahead and hit Ruvain, or I'm going to split his head open. Okay, so we'll say so pretty significant. So it sounds like it is dealing with personal injury. Ela Tanaihi. Rather, we'll say the ability, whether or not the person has the ability to subject themselves to harm, is actually machlokes tanaim. Watch this. So the Gemara says, Ela Tanaihi. The ikal man damar ina adam rasha lechawal atzmo. The ikal man damar adam rasha lechawal ba'atzmo. Both say it's a fundamental machlokes tanaim. Does a person have the ability to subject themselves to damages or not? Here we go. The Gemara says, Man tana d'sham mislei da'amar ein adam rasha. So we'll say, who is the opinion that says that a person doesn't have the ability to subject themselves to physical harm? So the Gemara says, Ilema hatana. Maybe it's the following tana. The sanya va'ach as dimchem lenafsho seichem edrosh. So we'll say the pasuk says, I will hold you accountable ultimately again for taking your own life. Now both say, now that's the pasuk that prohibits suicide. Pakash Baruch Hu says, if you take your own life, I will hold you accountable. So maybe that's a raya that what? Maybe that's a raya that halacha l'maisa, you're not allowed to subject yourself to self-injury. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Lazar Omer miyad nafsho seichem edrosh as dimchem. From literally again, if you take your own life, I will hold you accountable. So that shows that what? You can't subject yourself to personal harm. The Gemara says, well, maybe not. The dilma katala shiny. Both say, maybe that's different. In other words, maybe everyone will agree you can't take your own life. That doesn't necessarily mean you can't subject yourself to personal injury. Ela haitana. Both say rather from the following time. The sanya mekaran ala meis v'lo medarchei emori. Both say very interesting. What is the halacha? The halacha is you could tear your clothing over the dead. Right, you could tear his clothing over the dead, and this is not considered to be one of the Emori practices. Darchei Emori bosa means emulating the ways of the Gentile nations. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Lazar Shamati Shamekarea Alames Yoser Midai Loke. Rabbi Lazar said, I heard that if you tear your clothing too much, you over tear, that ultimately again you get malchus. Why do you get malchus? Mishum bal tashchis. Both say you get malchus ultimately again for the prohibition of bal tashchis is the prohibition for unnecessary waste. So halach l'maisa, I heard that if you tear your clothing excessively, you're chayiv for bal tashchis. Now both say, now if you're going to be chayiv for unnecessary destruction of your clothing, then kol shekain gufo. Then all the more so ultimately again you are chayiv for unnecessary destruction of your body, subjecting yourself to harm. So the Gemara says, what do you see from here? There's a raya that Allah l'maisa you're chayiv for harming yourself. I v'dilma begadim shiny the psida delo haderhu. Maybe clothing is different. So we'll say maybe clothing is different. Maybe Allah l'maisa you are subject ultimately again to unnecessary destruction for your clothing because it's a type of destruction ultimately again that does not regenerate. Well, you know what we'll do? We'll stop over here for today. Excellent pickup on Ahmed Bays. We did good. Right, so again, so nice we'll pick up. But again, just understand we're ending off, we'll say, with this outstanding question, which is, are you allowed to go ahead and subject yourself to physical harm, to physical damage? We know that you're allowed to go ahead and halacha l'maisa subject yourself to boshes. Can you subject yourself to physical harm? Fundamental machlokas. Shkoyach. All right, Chevra Zoom, have a great day, everyone.